Today, we are going to look at the genus of snakes known as Agkistrodon. While you have likely not come across the genus name before, many of you will likely be familiar with some of the species in it, such as the Cottonmouths, Copperheads, and moccasins. As usual, there is a document in the description with sources for the images used, and some of the scientific papers that I found useful when researching. Cottonmouths are vipers, meaning that they are in the family Viperidae. I have actually done a full phylogenetic breakdown of the different families of snake, so feel free to watch that video if you are interested. However, if you have seen that video, or know something about snake phylogenetics, you will know two things. 1. There are a lot of different families of snake. And 2. Their phylogeny is complicated and often disputed. Currently, vipers are included in the colubriforms clade, which makes them most closely related to the slug-eating snakes, mud snakes, elapids, and colubrids. That honestly doesn't give us too much useful information, however, since the colubrids alone account for roughly 75% of all known snakes. The word viper comes from Latin, almost purely since the Latin vipera literally means viper. However, the origins of this word are thought to come from a combination of the Latin words for living and to beget. This is believed to refer to vipers giving birth to live young, similar to boas but unlike most other reptiles. Vipers are not truly viviparous, as this name might suggest, but instead many of them are ovoviviparous. This is where the eggs are essentially kept inside the mother after being fertilized, where they hatch and the young then emerge from the mother as newborns. The end result is essentially the same, but the method to get there is quite different. Note that not all vipers do this. Some do still lay nests of eggs, but ovoviviparity is far more common among vipers than egg-laying is. Vipers are known for their deadly venom, and along with the elapids are one of the most dangerous families of snakes for humans. Elapids, for reference, includes most of the venomous Australian snakes, cobras, and the coral snakes. Vipers have two key differences to them. The first, and the easiest to see, is the triangular shape of the head of many of their species. This is caused by the position of their large venom glands on either side of their head. While this is a good general rule, it is not a diagnostic feature. That is, it is not a feature that should actually be used to identify a viper. For example, the death adder, one of the Australian elapids, also has a very triangular head. Of course, they are still highly venomous, so you should avoid getting too close to them, but the point here is that they are not vipers. The other key difference, and the one that makes this family unique, is the structure of their fangs. Vipers are sometimes called the hinged fang snakes, which is in contrast to the fixed fang elapids. Viper fangs are hinged, so are folded back when the mouth is closed, but are brought forward into an attacking pose as the snake opens its mouth and prepares to strike. This can happen very quickly, and gives them a very important advantage. It lets them have much larger fangs. Since vipers don't have to worry about stabbing themselves with their own teeth, their fangs can get much longer than the fangs of other snakes, which still have to be able to close their mouths without their teeth being able to move position. This severely limits the length of fangs snakes like elapids can have, while vipers have evolved to avoid this constraint. The length of these fangs means that the venom is injected deeply enough that vipers use their fangs more to stab their target as opposed to actually biting like some other snakes do. They can then retreat and let the prey succumb to the venom, and the snake does not have to risk injuring itself by continuing to struggle with their target. There are many other differences between vipers and other snakes like the elapids. For example, viper venom is largely necrotic, meaning that it kills the body cells. This typically causes pain, swelling, and blood loss. The subject is usually killed by a dramatic drop in blood pressure. By contrast, elapid venom is usually neurotoxic, which paralyzes muscles and usually causes death by paralyzing the diaphragm, meaning the target essentially suffocates to death. Other snakes may have their own venom structures, but these are the main two variations, again showing the difference between vipers and elapids. Viperidae has three subfamilies. Azamianopinae, or Phaeus vipers, is a tiny group with only 2 species in it. Viperidae, or the true vipers, are much more diverse with just under 100 species. The Cottonmouths are in the third subfamily, Crotalinae. This is the largest subfamily with over 150 different species. These are known as the pit vipers, a name that makes sense once you know their diagnostic feature. Pit vipers have an organ known as the loreal pit. This organ allows pit vipers to sense infrared heat, essentially allowing them to sense warm-blooded animals. This gives them an extreme advantage when attacking mammals and birds, as they can use this to accurately strike their targets even when they cannot see. The loreal pit can actually be seen on pit vipers, although if you are close enough to see it on a wild snake, you are definitely too close for safety. It is a small hole on the snake's snout, on one of the scales between the nostril and the eye. While there are many genera of pit viper, today we are only looking at one of these, Agkistrodon. This unusual genus name is a combination of the Greek words for fishhook and teeth. This is likely more to do with their preferred prey being fish, as opposed to the actual structure of their teeth, as their teeth are fairly typical snake fangs. Despite being pit vipers, and so having the loreal pits I mentioned earlier, many of these species are known for feeding on invertebrates, fish, and amphibians, which makes heat-sensing organs rather redundant. Most species will still opportunistically feed on birds and mammals, however, and it can be useful for defense, so the organ is not completely useless to them. These snakes have many common names: cottonmouths, moccasins, copperheads, cantils, and many others. Many of these names make sense. Cottonmouths have white mouths that they use as a threat display. Copperheads are often a reddish-brown or coppery colour. Cantil and moccasin are not quite as obvious to English speakers, as they have their origins in other languages. Cantil is believed to originate with the indigenous Xaltil people in Mexico, and means yellow lips, describing their local species. Moccasin is the Algonquian word for shoe, although the reason this was the name given to a deadly snake is not entirely clear. It could be to do with the coloration, or perhaps how quietly the snake moves. These snakes are all closely related to each other and share many features. Their fangs are short for a viper, and as you might have guessed from their preferred diet, most species are typically found in or near water. They tend to be darker colours, with lighter patterning across their body, perhaps as a form of camouflage for when they are swimming. Their venom is hemotoxic and causes pain, swelling, bleeding, vomiting, and even gangrene. Some of these symptoms can lead to death in humans, but if treated properly, death is rare. There are 8 species of Agkistrodontids, and these are only found in North and Central America. The genus used to be larger and included some Asian species, but these were later moved to other genera after genetic analysis. The eastern copperhead, Agkistrodon contortrix, is the type species of this genus. This means that they are the best example of this genus. If other species in the genus are decided to be more distantly related, like the Asian species I mentioned before, then the type species will always remain with its original genus with its most closely related species, while the others are moved to different genera. Eastern copperheads are common throughout much of the eastern half of the United States, with the notable exception of most of Florida. They are a beautifully coloured snake, with dark brown blotches roughly hourglass-shaped on a reddish-brown background. They use this coloration as camouflage in the deciduous forests that are its preferred habitat. Like the other species in this genus, it still likes remaining near water and can often be found in more swampy environments as well. Unfortunately, this camouflage means their preferred defense when sensing danger is to freeze and hope they aren't spotted. It is for this reason that around half of all treated snake bites in the United States are from the eastern copperhead, from people stepping too close to it without realizing that the snake is there. Eastern copperheads can get to just under a metre long, or around 3 feet. The young are born with yellow or green tail tips, which darken to the same colour as the rest of the snake by the time they are a year old. One possibility for this odd tail coloration is that the young use their tails as caudal lures. Caudal luring is a form of mimicry, where the snake wiggles its tail to imitate a worm or other small animal. When an animal approaches to prey on the worm, they instead become food for the young snake. This is a common strategy among young vipers. During the cold winter months, eastern copperheads will hibernate in crevices, often with other species like timber rattlesnakes or black rat snakes. During the hot summer they tend to be nocturnal, but in the cooler spring and autumn will shift to foraging during the day. Eastern copperheads used to be split into 5 subspecies. However, genetic analysis of these proved that 3 of them were too similar to be split in this way, while the remaining 2 were different enough that they should be considered a separate species, and so became the broad-banded copperhead. It should not be very surprising then that the most closely related species to the eastern copperhead is the broad-banded copperhead, Agkistrodon laticinctus. It is found in the southern United States, in parts of Kansas, Oklahoma, and Texas, and so is sometimes also known as the Texas copperhead. In parts of their range, both broad-banded and eastern copperheads can be found, making identification a little tricky. The patterning between them is a little different. In general, the blotches on the easterns narrow in the middle, giving them that hourglass shape I mentioned earlier. This doesn't typically happen on broad-banded ones, hence the name. However, as the markings do vary between individuals, this is not a solid rule that will always work, but it is a decent guideline to follow. They are a similar size to the eastern copperheads, getting to around 90 centimeters or just under 3 feet long. The juveniles also have the tails used for caudal luring. Broad-banded copperheads are shy and nocturnal. Like many vipers, it is an ambush predator and will opportunistically feed on a wide variety of prey, from mammals and birds to lizards, frogs, and insects. As with many snakes, the young consume a lot more insects, and young broad-banded copperheads appear to have a particular liking for caterpillars, but the adults do still consume insects when given the opportunity. Next in the phylogeny are the two species of cottonmouth. Starting with the northern cottonmouth, Agkistrodon piscivorus, this is the more widespread of the two. It is found in the southern and southeastern United States. The northern cottonmouth, along with its close relative, the Florida cottonmouth, are some of the only semi-aquatic vipers in the world. The northern cottonmouth is the largest snake in this genus, although the average length is a modest 80 centimeters or 2.6 feet long. However, in the eastern part of their range, they can get considerably larger than this, with some reaching 1.8 meters or around 6 feet long. They are called cottonmouths due to one of their threat displays. When they feel threatened, they will open their jaws wide, exposing the white lining of their mouth. If the threat does not back off, the cottonmouth will strike at the target. They do have a couple of other threat displays. They will sometimes rapidly strike their tail on dead leaves to simulate a rattlesnake's rattle, and they can also musk, releasing a strong odour to further try and deter predators. While bites from cottonmouths are common, they are usually from people stepping on them, and deaths from cottonmouth bites are very rare. Despite this, some people will go out of their way to kill cottonmouths when they see them. This is extremely unfortunate, and for several reasons. Firstly, cottonmouths only bite when they feel threatened. They have gained a negative reputation in parts of the United States, but this is mostly due to being known as a venomous snake that can be found in urban areas, and so comes into contact with people fairly frequently. Like almost every snake alive today, cottonmouths are far too small to consider humans prey, so only ever attack in self-defense. In fact, attacking a cottonmouth is one of the best ways to get bitten in the first place. The other reason these killings are a tragedy is that many of the people who do this do not take the time to learn how to identify different species of snake. If I didn't have the caption telling you what species was on screen at the moment, you might assume it is another cottonmouth. In fact, it is the harmless common water snake. But many of these are also killed by people assuming that they are cottonmouths. The two species may both live near water and have similar colorations, but there are easy ways to tell them apart. Cottonmouths are vipers, and, like I said earlier, they have large triangular heads. Water snakes, on the other hand, are colubrids, and their head is as slender as their body with no distinct neck between the two. There are other more subtle differences. Water snakes don't have loreal pits, and the pupils in the eyes are round instead of vertical slits, but if you are close enough to see those features, then you're probably closer to a potential cottonmouth than you really want to be. Anyway, back to the cottonmouth. They are usually found in or near slow-moving lakes, marshes, and streams. They are good swimmers and can also swim into salty environments like estuaries and bays, and can swim between offshore islands and the mainland. The bulk of their diet is fish and frogs, but they are opportunistic feeders and will eat almost any small vertebrate, including other snakes. They are also one of the few known snakes that will eat carrion when given the opportunity. Their predators include many birds, snapping turtles, and ophiophagus or snake-eating snakes. They actually have an interesting defense against the ophiophagic snakes, known as body blows or body bridging. This is where the cottonmouth forms a middle section of their body into a loop and raises it above the ground. This can be used to prevent them from being swallowed by another snake, but it can also be used offensively to hit the attacking snake and drive them away. Female cottonmouths can choose to undergo parthenogenesis if there is a lack of males in the area. Parthenogenesis basically creates a viable embryo from unfertilized egg cells, meaning that the female can have offspring without needing to mate with a male. The benefits of this are obvious. It still allows her to reproduce when there are few or no other cottonmouths around. However, this form of reproduction does decrease the gene pool. The young are not full clones of their mother, as there is still some crossing over of genetic material during parthenogenesis, but it does not give them the same genetic variation that would be expected if they had two parents. It also means that genes that are harmful are more likely to be passed on, especially if it occurs over successive generations, as the population becomes more inbred. Cottonmouths are ovoviviparous, like many vipers. Females give birth to between 1 and 20 young at a time, although litters of 6 to 8 are the most common. Females become sexually mature at 3 years, and they usually give birth once every 2 years. Unusually for a snake, cottonmouth females have been observed guarding her young for a time after birth. Parental behaviour in snakes is not common, but female cottonmouths seem to stay near the young for a few weeks after their birth and will attempt to deter predators with warning behaviours. The Florida cottonmouth, Agkistrodon conanti, used to be considered a subspecies of the northern cottonmouth, but genetic testing proved that it was different enough to be considered a separate species. It is found in the United States, on the Florida Peninsula, southern Georgia and nearby offshore islands. Like the other cottonmouth, it is usually found near water and will inhabit almost any waterway within its range, including brackish water, and it can swim through the ocean to and from offshore islands. It is smaller than the northern cottonmouth, but is still a decently large viper, getting to lengths of 1.2 meters or 4 feet. The Florida cottonmouth does look very similar to its northern cousin, but has slightly different patterning on its head. The Florida cottonmouth has 2 darker vertical lines on their snout, from their nostril down over their mouth. The northern cottonmouth lacks this distinct pattern in this area. Much of their diet, habitat, and reproduction is very similar or the same as the northern cottonmouth. They are known to congregate around drying pools of water during the summer due to the abundance of easy-to-find prey that are trapped there. Females usually give birth to 6 to 8 young, although this can be as high as 15. Young are usually born in the summer, and they typically give birth once every 2 years. Moving on to the last clade in the phylogeny, this is the Cantils. Starting with Taylor's Cantil, Agkistrodon taylori. It is also known as the metapel in Spanish, or the ornate Cantil. It is a distinctively patterned snake with bands of black and grey-brown, accented with white and orange, giving it a motley appearance. They are sexually dimorphic, meaning that the males and females look different. In this case, the males are a much darker colour than the female. It is found in northeastern Mexico. While the IUCN has given it the threat rating of least concern, this is actually fairly dubious. It got this rating due to its large range and assumed stable population, but it is a species that is rarely seen. More notably, in their regional risk classification system, the Mexican federal government has given it the rating of amenazada, meaning threatened. Since the IUCN last assessed this species in 2007, it is overdue for being updated, and it would not be surprising to see the rating change if this does happen. Since Taylor's Cantil is rarely seen, much of the information we know about it comes from captive specimens. It is a lowland species, usually found from sea level to about 500 meters, although there are some isolated examples of it being found at higher altitudes. It is assumed that they have a generalist diet, like the better-known closely related species. It is most active during the cool and rainy season of October to March, and is usually crepuscular or nocturnal, although it is occasionally seen during the day on rainy or overcast days. Like the other members of this genus, Taylor's Cantils give birth to live young. The males engage in ritualized combat, where they wrestle with each other to establish dominance. When near a female, the 2 males will intertwine each other with their bodies and attempt to raise their head higher than their opponents, while also trying to pin the other's head on the ground. The winner mates with the female, while the loser retreats unharmed. In captivity, a death has been reported, but this was likely due to the males being confined to the same cage. In the wild, this is unlikely to happen, as the losing male would presumably move far enough away from the mated female to no longer be a threat. Females typically give birth to 3 to 11 young. These young are patterned the same as the adults, but have the light-coloured tail used for caudal luring, as is common in this genus, and as I described with the Copperheads earlier. The Mexican Cantil, Agkistrodon bilineatus, has many common names: the Cantil, the Mexican yellow-lipped viper, and the black moccasin, among others. Its taxonomic status makes it difficult to find a current distribution map for them. Currently, it has no subspecies, but this was not always the case. It used to have 3 subspecies, but genetic analysis by Porras et al. In 2013 resulted in all three being elevated to separate species. The one now known as the Cantil is found largely along the western coast of Mexico, south to Honduras. The IUCN lists them as near threatened, but that also hasn't been updated since the species was split into three, so it is unclear how the individual species would be classified. They list their greatest threat as human persecution. As mentioned with the Cottonmouths, this is a large threat to many venomous snakes, as people will sometimes go out of their way to maim or kill them on sight, with a "let's get them before they get us" mentality. Of course, snakes only bite humans in self-defense and prefer to flee or hide if possible instead of attacking. Cantils average around 60 centimeters or 2 feet long. Their venom appears to be much more dangerous than the Copperheads and Cottonmouths, and they are reported as one of the most feared animals in Mexico. While their bite can cause the pain and swelling typical from the other species we have been looking at, larger adults can also inflict severe necrosis, with the venom rotting the flesh until the bone is exposed. This can require limbs to be amputated in around 17% of cases, and it can be fatal within a few hours if the victim doesn't reach medical assistance. A lot of the evidence for this potent venom is anecdotal. This is further confused as some of the evidence for it comes from Costa Rica and Nicaragua, suggesting that the snake involved was the southern Cantil instead, and raising questions about any differences in the venom between the two closely related species. As the name suggests, the Yucatecan Cantil, Agkistrodon russeolus, is only found on the Yucatan Peninsula in southeastern Mexico and northern Belize. Most of its sightings are at the northern tip of the peninsula, in the state of Yucatan in Mexico, but it has occasionally been sighted further south. Before 2013, it was considered a subspecies of the Cantil, before its status was elevated to a separate species. This unfortunately means that not too much is known about it, as any research historically done on it was attributed to the Cantil instead. Fortunately, given its restricted distribution, any Cantils found on the Yucatan Peninsula can retroactively be assumed to be the Yucatecan Cantil. The body is a reddish-brown colour with many broad bands of brown around it. They have very distinctive head markings, with thin white lines going from the snout to each eye and then to the back of the head, and slightly broader lines going from the snout across the top of the mouth, giving it the yellow lip for which the Cantils take their name. Similar to Cantils, females are typically a lighter colour than the males. While a generalist predator, mammals and lizards seem to be the preferred prey, but this is heavily dependent on where the snake lives. Those found near the coast are smaller, and seem to prefer lizards, while those in forested areas tend to be larger and prefer small mammals. Sources of water seem to be less important for the Yucatecan Cantil than it was for the other species that we have been looking at. This is suggested by the lack of fish and frogs in their diet, but also by the areas in which they are found. Large parts of the Yucatan Peninsula are dry forests where surface water is scarce or completely absent. They are also found in the wet tropical forest farther south, but this does strongly suggest that these Cantils do not rely on bodies of water like the Cottonmouths do. The last species in this genus is the southern Cantil, Agkistrodon howardgloydi, sometimes also known as Gloyd's moccasin. Like the Yucatecan Cantil, this species used to be a subspecies of the Mexican Cantil, until genetic testing in 2013 elevated it to a separate species. The southern Cantil is found along the western coast of Central America, primarily in Nicaragua, although its range does extend north into Honduras and south into Costa Rica. Like with the Cantil, the southern Cantil is feared throughout much of its range for its venomous bite. It is sometimes considered even more feared than the fer-de-lance, one of the most dangerous vipers in the region. This is somewhat surprising given how unlikely other species in this genus are to kill humans, but as I mentioned with the Cantil, there is anecdotal evidence that the venom of the southern Cantil is much more deadly, causing necrosis at the bite site, requiring limbs to be amputated, or death within a few hours. The southern Cantil is in the same situation as the Yucatecan Cantil, as it has not been well studied, and many of the historical studies on it have grouped it in with the Mexican Cantil, as they were considered a single species at the time. It is a lowland species, only being found up to 600 meters above sea level, and is rare throughout its range. It has been suggested that it could reach the criteria to be considered endangered, but a formal assessment has not yet been carried out on this species. It has a varied diet, with individuals found eating fish, frogs, birds, rodents, and eggs. There is some evidence that their diet changes as they get older. Neonates eat mostly frogs and lizards, while juveniles add mice to this diet. Adults prefer mice and rats, but will still eat some lizards. I hope you have enjoyed this video. Cottonmouths, copperheads, and cantils are fascinating snakes, but unfortunately the human persecution they face is devastating, both for them and for other similar looking species. Thank you for listening, and feel free to suggest another group of animals you want to see me cover in the comments.